Welcome to the Prevail Over Cancer Podcast, where we take a metabolic approach to help guide you on preventing, prevailing, and striving over cancer.
We are live on the Prevail Over Cancer Podcast. I am Jeff Lopes, incredible co-host Keith Bishop. How are you, buddy?
Doing great, and you?
I'm doing amazing. Like always. This past week, I've had a handful of individuals reach out to me, and I seem like it's on a regular basis, ask me a typical question I seem to get all the time is chemotherapy. Is it for me? Is it not? What should I do? My oncologist is asking. And it's a question where, on a personal level, I have not been an advocate for it. I didn't do it. I refused it. But I think it's going to be important having the science behind it with an individual like you. So let's talk about this week. Let's talk about chemotherapy. Sure. Let's talk about the benefits, the negatives, side effects, the positives. Let's get it from every angle. So we're giving our audience as much information as possible. And they could also, once the podcast is done, reach out to an individual like yourself if they have more questions to follow up on. Mm-hmm. So chemotherapy. Where's your mindset when you hear chemotherapy?
Well, to me, it's, and I have to admit, part of that's going to be like my personal view on this. And so I am trained, in that. Matter of fact, in pharmacy school, I had a rotation in in oncology, and little do I know, back in the 70s, that was my first exposure to that. And so little did I know what my personal future was going to be like. And then, transitioning into this over the years. So I was actually trained in that and aware of that from a pharmaceutical standpoint. And so I have to admit, I'm not sure I would do it, but then there's some unknowns because it is a toxic chemical. And the way it works is that it's a toxic chemical that gets into the cells and disrupts that cell to damage it. But then it's our body's responsibility to get rid of that damaged cell before it gets repaired. So everything I help my clients with, matter of fact, most of my clients are already doing chemotherapy. So most of my clients are deep into this, stage 4, doing chemo and or radiation. So I'm very aware of what they're going through. I consider it to be kind of like a last ditch effort. And so it's not something that I take lightly. I don't know if I would do it, and my wife would be the same way. I don't know if she would do it or not, either. You have to weigh the potential benefits versus the definite risks that are known.
Let me ask you a question there. So when you get into oncology, first diagnosed with cancer, whether you go the route, if it's a tumor, you go to the surgery route, whether you decide to go to radiation route, like they're going to throw all these, oncologists going to throw all these things at you, and it's very overwhelming the first time. When I was there, I was very overwhelmed. I was a little different because I did my own research. So when I sat in front of oncology, and the gentleman, which incredible doctor, but he's following his guidelines. And when he sat in front of him and he proposed all these chemotherapy options to me, I was aware of them already. I already was aware of all the side effects. I was aware of the statistics with these exact drugs he was going to mention to me. Most people are not. Most people just sit there. They're going through probably the scariest moment of their lives, and they're just gasping for some help. And I love how you said it would be my last option. Mm-hmm. But most oncologists are giving that as the first option to most people.
Correct. That's their job.
When you're hearing this, and I want to talk about the positives, because there are individuals that have done chemotherapy and they've lived long lives after.
Correct.
So when you're looking at that, my biggest concern with oncology is most oncologists don't really dive into the nutritional aspect, the healing aspect, the holistic aspect, the metabolic aspect of cancer treatments. So they tell you to keep doing what you're doing. They keep telling you. So if you have this incredibly horrible diet, lifestyle, and you do chemo, all of a sudden that chemo is not only affecting your bad cells, it's affecting your good cells.
Correct.
And if you're not on a proper supplementation, proper diets from an individual like yourself, Keith, being guided, your body's chances of a recovery and your good cells recovering properly are very low. And that's why you hear the death rate on individuals that do chemotherapy within the 5 years is extraordinarily high.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So where's your mindset with that when you know that it's going to be the first option that most oncologists are going to throw at somebody, and they're not going to give them the help or the benefit of a proper diet and nutrition like yourself? How is that going to? Where's the mindset with that, and how is that going to change?
Well, it is the number one thing that it's, as you know, it's so scary when it happens, and most people aren't of that natural mindset. And there are some that are, and most of them have not listened to a podcast like this. That they're not taking supplements except for maybe a multiple vitamin, but they've not really jumped into the natural aspect. So they don't know it's scary, and the oncologist is the expert, they think, and in their area of oncology, yes. In the area of food and supplements, no. That is not their area. They haven't studied it. It's rare. Let's put it that way. There are a few functional medicine oncologists or natural or integrative oncologists. They're extremely rare. We don't have any here in our area, our region. We have some medical doctors that do integrative treatments along with, chemotherapy and things like that. Yes. Like vitamin C IVs and such. But an integrative oncologist just is extremely rare. So it's very, very frustrating. That's where most people that, once again, I see have already been diagnosed. They've already, got that chemotherapy started, and or they've done their surgery and they've got it started. The issue is that chemotherapy, it is a toxic chemical, and it does concentrate in the faster growing cells. And so cancer cells are fast growing, but also the gut, the mouth, the throat, the esophagus, the stomach, the intestinal tract are very fast growing cells. Like you can have a wound, like I bit my cheek the other night. 2 or 3 days later, it's completely healed because those cells are growing and growing and growing real fast. So, but those are the cells that are going to be damaged with the chemotherapy too. So there's a lot of side effects. The chemotherapy doesn't know the difference between good and bad.
Yeah.
And so it's going to damage those cells. And but the main problem is that people are not they're not changing the environment in their body, that allowed that to happen. So the chemotherapy kills those cells, but then there's this stem cell issue, kind of like an originator, but it's a cancer stem cell that has a tendency to become resistant to those chemicals. So, but it also may be they're just more like stem cells that are still in the same environment, and that's just more toxic than it was before. Environment meaning our body, and we haven't made enough changes to keep those stem cells from morphing into cancer cells. So the whole problem is that we're not addressing the underlying issue,
the root cause
with cancer. We've got to make a change inside our body, the root cause. We got to make a change in our body. So even for me, that's what I'm doing. So I was diagnosed and had surgically removed a basal cell carcinoma, and that was on my back. I'd already made a lot of changes. And so I just tweaked it just a little bit more, but things are different. So the other places on my body were getting better, that were precancerous that I could see. This spot, I don't know, but I wasn't going to take a chance. I wanted to cut out, and because I didn't want those cells remaining in there. That kind of cancer we just can't see it. We just don't know. There's not a great test for it. So I had it cut out. But we got to change the internal environment and get to the source of the problem. then the chemotherapy, it is toxic. And matter of fact, each chemotherapy treatment is similar to surgery. I mean, it's like major problem. It damages the body. You feel fatigued often. If you don't at the beginning, you will be. Like, you can have an outpatient surgery and it's a minor thing for a day or two. But if you keep doing that every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, that's become a problem. And you just keep getting more and more damage and more fatigue. And yes, the statistics aren't great. It's kind of cloudy because the cancer was a very major problem. Now they're doing chemotherapy, and now they're not eating right, and because they don't feel good, they're not absorbing their nutrients, and so a whole cascade of
let's talk about that. I wrote
chemotherapy.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So I wrote down the side effects. I mean, the number one thing it does is weaken your immune system. And when you're trying to fight cancer, your goal is to have the strongest immune system as possible. So that's the first negative thing. And then it says anemia, bleeding, bruising, nausea, vomiting, ultra fatigue, nerve damage, constipation, diarrhea. It's like your body, you're doing something to fight off cancer, but it feels like it's shutting down everything good in your body naturally to fight. So that's the big question, is it doing positive? Is it doing a negative thing? I'm going to ask you a question. When somebody is, and this is, you're going to have more expertise in this, and I'll tell you why I'm asking this, because a lot of times you always hear that an individual doesn't die of the cancer, they die of the treatment, or they die of the drugs. And a lot of times it has to do with steroids. Do oncologists add steroids to strengthen your body? This is a question because I obviously don't know. Does strengthen your body when you're doing chemotherapy as a balance? Like, what's the purpose of the steroid when you're doing chemotherapy? Why I'm asking is this. I had a really close friend in my early 30s that had a brain tumor, passed away with the brain tumor, and he didn't pass away with the cancer, the brain tumor. He passed away with the side effects of all the drugs. They had put him on chemo. They had put him on steroids. The steroids started swelling his body, retaining water to the point where his skin on his feet were cracking and ripping open. Yeah. He was so swelled, and he ended up dying of just liver, kidney function, everything just shut down in his body. And it was all the steroids he was on. So what is the purpose of doing steroids when you're on the chemo? Is it to kind of strengthen your body? Why do they do that?
Yeah. Well, in that particular case, they're giving steroids because of the swelling inside the brain.
Okay.
The tumor, for example. And so whether he's going to do chemotherapy or not, they would probably be prescribing steroids, cortisone type things to decrease the swelling, which like he was at a high risk of seizures.
Okay.
And so by decreasing that swelling, so the cortisone will actually decrease the swelling, steroids will decrease the swelling in the brain. So now we're not going to get that pressure inside the brain. So headaches and seizures are the main thing in that case. But also, there's a side effect. They're trying to decrease the side effects of the chemotherapy. So cortisone steroids decrease inflammation in the body, which is a side effect. And that inflammation is a driver of cancer. And there's a few studies showing that it seems to help the chemotherapy to work better because it decreases, some of those side effects. Inflammation is a driver of cancer.
Yeah.
But the major problem is that it creates that water retention. But even worse than that is it elevates your blood glucose levels significantly.
Which is
elevated, and that's
the cancer grows.
Fuel for the cancer. And
so it's this vicious cycle.
Yeah, that's right. It is. And matter of fact, there are statistics showing that, and I studied brain cancer a lot because my mother died of brain cancer.
Yeah.
And I was studying that, and same thing with my clients. Actually statistically, the people that take higher doses of the steroids that have brain cancer, their odds of survival are much lower than the people that can take lower, if not even any steroids. And so I'm always encouraging my clients to talk to the doctor and don't just accept that standard dose. Everybody gets the same thing.
Yeah.
Are you having any seizures? If you're not having seizures, should you be taking that? So they need to talk to the doctor about it. And so I'm trying to encourage them about that particular issue, but it raises blood glucose. And that's part of the weight gain issue. So some of it is water retention and body fat. Body fat itself is a risk factor for cancer. There's inflammation chemicals and even estrogens and things like that. So it depends on what type of cancer from that body fat. So it's a well-known fact. So but also it can decrease some of those side effects. Yes. Rashes and itching and allergy type things.
Another thing is you hear oncology always say is when they do put you on a chemotherapy or they put you on a radiation, they tell you to stop taking vitamins. And they pretty much ask you to stop taking all your vitamins. I mean, to a degree where it's like you're taking all these supplements, all these vitamins to keep your immune system strong, to keep you battling through. And then you hear, you listen to other podcasts, you fill information with individuals that are cancer survivors through social media, influencers, and they are the opposite. They're like, you should be doubly, tripling your dose of these supplements when you're on chemo or you're on radiation because it's going to help your immune system stay strong. Where's your mindset with that?
Well, so that's what I do is coach people on taking, those supplements, appropriate supplements. So most of these supplements will actually enhance the effectiveness of the chemotherapy.
So why is oncology telling you not to take them?
Well, because they haven't studied it. And if they recommend, say, it's okay, then if something goes wrong, they're stepping outside of the traditional medical groups, have not approved it. If they make that recommendation, now they're liable and they could be sued for malpractice. So they want to be careful. But here's the other issue is that there is a little bit of research definitely showing that antioxidants like vitamin C and vitamin E can repair cells and from damage of chemotherapy and radiation. And so that's where they're jumping on board, is saying that, well, therefore you shouldn't take any supplements. And part of it is, they just don't know. But then, by that ignorance and not knowing, I'm not saying it's bad. I just don't know. That's what ignorant means, is that they don't know. And so, but they don't know. And so they're making a recommendation still that they haven't studied it. So when they read their own medical research journals, they'll find that many of these supplements and herbs actually enhance the effectiveness of the chemotherapy drugs. They help them to work better. They protect the good cells, and they even make the cancer cells more susceptible to that chemo.
I love that you said it protects the good cells, which is what you so definitely need when you are dealing with something like that. If you do decide to go that route, which once again, I'm going to state I'm not in favor of, but if you do decide to go that route and you've sat down with your family, you sat down with your friends, you've sat down with oncology, and you've made it your decision to go that route, you need to protect your good cells. You need to stay strong.
Right.
And a lot of these supplements, if done right and prescribed right through an individual like Keith, are going to help a lot of the side effects.
Oh, yes.
Because the side effects, I like, you see people that are on chemo. Like, I go to oncology, do in the next couple of weeks, I got my annuals and I'm doing all my PET CT scans, doing all my stuff, which I really don't look forward to, but it's part of the journey, the rest of my life.
I have a protocol for you, how to flush those chemicals out, stuff like that.
Okay, we're going to talk about that after. Yeah. So, but I'm going to be doing all that. And I sit there in oncology and I'm sitting in a room with 150 people, and it's just, and you're watching everybody in there, and your individuals are going into the rooms, doing their chemo, coming back out, and they look gray. They look sick. They look weak. They look frail. And I'm like, this is not good. These people are going to a room, sticking poison in the arm, and then coming out and going to have McDonald's and on their way home. There's no sense of balance and understanding, and there's no one teaching them. So it's so important to have individuals like yourself or to have podcasts like ours that make people wake up and understand that they need to. It's got to be holistic. You got to do the supplements. You got to eat right. You got to keep your body as strong as possible to not only fight through it and stop the side effects, but once you are done the chemo, to recover as quickly as possible.
Exactly. Yes. And so part of purpose of targeting supplements, but even in chemotherapy back in the 70s, when I first was exposed to that, they were basically doing kind of like one chemotherapy drug. It wasn't working. And so now they do 2 or 3 different drugs together, because the more ways you can hit the cancer, the better the survival rate. But when we add supplements into that, often that's even going to enhance that survival rate even more, because we're just doing more things and make it more difficult for those cancer cells to repair and to grow. So if we can disrupt different growth patterns, the cancer cells they really struggle. And then also it prevents this, I say prevent, but it reduces the risk of this. It's called multi-drug resistance. So once a person starts chemotherapy, they're at a high risk of it. Well, if it doesn't work, the next chemotherapy they're going to do.
I was about to say that was actually, I wrote that down because I wanted to bring that up to you, because
yes,
this is why it should be exactly what you said when we started this podcast, your last line of defense.
Right.
Because the minute you decide to do chemo from day one, if that cancer ever comes back, it's going to be so resistant against this, and it's going to come back with a vengeance.
Yeah.
And that's why you hear the likelihood of survival within the first 5 years are very low, because the chance of that cancer coming back are always a high end if you don't do drastic changes to your life. And if it does come back, it's going to be so resistant against that chemo. So the oncology will say, let's try it again, or try a higher dose. And it's not going to work the second time or the third time around. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So continue that.
Yes. Yeah. So this multi-drug resistance issue. So once again, so if we can hit the cancer cells from many, many, many different angles, and add on top of the chemotherapy, the supplements, now we can kill more cells, and they don't have this opportunity for the multi-drug resistant. But also, the supplements and food, eating right, and supplements. Now we're changing the environment inside the body. Now we're going to keep those stem cells, from morphing into cancer cells. So it's a combination thing that we have to do. So we, and I think that's probably the number one thing, is that underlying issue of not long survival is we're not changing the internal environment.
Yeah.
We've got to make things different. So, my practice, almost like everything I do now, is I'm thinking, is this different than what my parents and grandparents did? And anything that I'm doing, it's like, I'm not going to eat that dessert every night like they did, after dinner, that, they didn't have good results with that. So therefore, I'm not going to do that. Occasional, yes, but I'm not going to do it every single night.
I don't do it at all. I don't do it at all. Let me talk about 2 things. One, I've read, and when I first got diagnosed and I did my surgery, and as soon as I got out of surgery, oncology was within days. I was still cut open on 5 different spots in my body, and I had just got home, and I was supposed to be in the hospital for 5 to 6 days. I was out in less than 48 hours. I was home already. And that's because I had taken care of myself and I built my immune system so strong, and I built my body so strong that my body recovered really quickly. When I was home, within 2 days, oncology was calling me, trying to book to sit down and start talking about when are we going to start chemo. And obviously I shut that door pretty quickly, but I had done all my research. Like I said, I'm probably one of the rare people that did all the research. And what I did find is, if I did go that route, I was trying to understand what I could do to eliminate the side effects, keep my body as strong as possible, keep my immune system as strong as possible. And if I did do that route, how would I make that as beneficial as possible? And what I read, and I want you to hit your mindset, and this is something we both talk about. We're very, very open about fasting. And I was told, if you do decide to do the chemo, fasting for 24 hours before you do chemo, you're going to get a lot more benefit to it. Have you heard about that before?
Oh, yes. Yeah, there's definitely research is developing on that. And so a combination of fasting and more of a ketogenic diet, also helps out. But fasting the day before and the day of, and even the day after, but that can be difficult. But there's, or decreasing the amount of food tremendously. So it doesn't. Ideally, a total fast, but that's difficult. Fast. I mean, beverages are okay.
Yeah.
Unsweetened beverages are okay, but no food. So yes, that is correct. So that makes those cancer cells weaker. I mean, they have a faster metabolism, and if they don't have the food, now they're not going to grow, and they seem to take in more chemicals, and it just makes them more susceptible. And also, potential of those bad foods. Once again, that's the entire internal environment. If we're putting in the junk food, the hamburgers and shakes and French fries, and pizza, that's just going to be a problem. And that's going to feed and keep setting up those cells to, keep surviving. So, and or morphing into cancer cells.
And the next thing I wanted to say was there was two things I wanted to jump on. The second is your gut health. So it is killing pretty much anything good in your body. So your gut health, your microbiome is going to be destroyed. So are you, if people are going through that treatment of chemotherapy and they decide to go that route, are you focusing on probiotics and building the good gut health? And
yes,
are you taking it to another level where you're really double, tripling the dose to really build the good gut health?
Well, combination. So I do nutrition physical, even virtual like this, to evaluate, if they're in an acid state, that means they're not absorbing nutrients. So that's a gut issue. Okay. Not just food, but that's a gut issue. And so actually we're evaluating if they have enough stomach acid. And if they don't, then we're going to actually have them take hydrochloric betaine HCl, hydrochloric acid capsules to help them absorb those nutrients better. And then number two, that acid even helps the good bacteria to grow and thrive properly. And then we're going to go with a probiotic. And those are just a few basic things. But that chemotherapy kills fast growing cells. The gut lining and the bacteria are fast growing cells.
Yeah.
And so that's that diarrhea type issue that is very common. And matter of fact, a young man, I haven't met him. His mother is trying to get him to do things, but he's I won't get too graphic, but he's got a major diarrhea problem, and so she's trying to help him. So she came and got a probiotic, but now he's throwing up, and so we're trying to get that in, and maybe go to a higher dose in his case because he's throwing it up. So. So that's extremely important. Most of our immune system. So the chemotherapy damages cells and or natural products that damage cells, but then the immune system has to recognize that damaged cancer cell, get hold of it,
and get rid of it.
Eat it up, get rid of it, get it out of the body. And if the immune system's not working, odds are it's just not going to work. So we have to support the immune system, and most of the immune system comes from our gut. So that's extremely important. And there's, as far as dose, it depends on the product, and some of them work better empty stomach. Some have to be refrigerated. Some of them with food's okay. But you don't want to skimp around on a probiotic. That is a basic part of my protocol.
Yeah, it is a basic part of my lifestyle as well. I mean, I do that. We talk about that, probiotics, and I think we should actually do a whole podcast on probiotics in the near future. So, to wrap this up, we started off by you saying it would be a last option.
Right.
I prefer it to be not an option for people. Let's wrap it up and just say, like, overall, if somebody is diagnosed with cancer, what research they should do, or what questions should they ask oncology, you think? And I think the first step I'm going to say is obviously reaching out to an individual like yourself. But what questions should they ask oncology before they jump the gun with a chemotherapy?
Well, they need to gather the information, and what are those treatments? What are the potential side effects, like you mentioned? Those side effect issues, and survival rate. People doing this in this situation and doing this chemotherapy, it's things we don't like to talk about, but what is that survival rate? Let me ask you a question before you jump in. Is there actual websites that you could find more information on this?
Because you go to a lot of these websites like American Cancer Society or the Canadian Cancer Society, they're sponsored by pharmaceutical companies. They're sponsored by the drug makers. So a lot of their content is not going to show the statistics that are true when it comes to chemotherapy. where could people find proper information or better information? Is there anywhere that you would recommend, or is it talking to an individual like yourself?
I don't know if it's a good source of
Okay.
information because it's all funded by the drug companies.
Yes.
And so I don't know of a good source. And you have to kind of trust somebody. So, my goal is not to say that you should or shouldn't do that. My goal is to educate you and let you know what these are, with my experience and these are what I think are options and, success rates. And once again, we don't like to talk about that, but, survivability, and, what are things along that line. So, and even that, even the natural area, there's not great statistics either. So there's not great statistics that I know of. There are some, yes, but I don't know those particular sources. I'm not in that traditional medical area, so I don't know what that would be.
Okay. So, I mean, my mindset is when it comes to chemotherapy, just like you said, it'll be your last line of defense, because if you make your first line of defense, if that cancer decides to come back or another cancer decides to start growing, your body is so immune to that. And through the whole process, if you do decide to go that route, whether you decide to go that route or don't go that route, once you're diagnosed with cancer or before you're diagnosed with cancer, your lifestyle has to change. The supplementations, your diet, your sleeping patterns, your workout, exercise, sauna. There's so many ways you could target and build your immune system to prevail over cancer, never get cancer, prevent cancer, or if you do have cancer, to make your immune system strong enough to get those cancer cells out of you. And like you said, grab them, eat them, dispose of them. So I'm not an advocate of chemo. I don't agree with it. I think it's not something that's going to benefit you over the long haul. And the stats that I read, unless you're going to make the drastic changes or willing to make the drastic changes, it's not going to benefit you. So when it comes to chemo, I'm against it. But if you do go that route, you need to reach out to somebody like Keith or reach out to Keith directly and allow this individual to set your guidelines, set the supplements, set the diet, set everything up that you are going to have as minimal side effects as possible. And your body will get as strong as possible once you've done your treatment to live a long life. So I appreciate you, Keith, and hopefully individuals that are just diagnosed with cancer and hear this podcast will reach out to you, or individuals like yourself in their area, and make the right choices. So if they decide to go that route, which once again, I'm going to state, I don't believe in it, but if you decide to go that route to do the chemotherapy, they are going to at least make the most out of that treatment. Right,
exactly. And I offer a quick little 15-minute free consult too. So they go to the website, they can schedule that. And on my website, in the coaching section of the website, and get an answer or two. Let's answer that. And so that there's a little bit of relief. There's emotional, spiritual, and therefore physical relief, knowing that I got an answer or somebody's helping me.
That's appreciate
so important.
100%. And that was something when I diagnosed, I didn't know who to turn to. I literally had no clue who to turn to. And I just started finding as much literature as possible, finding as many podcasts. Well, there wasn't really podcasts, but finding as much information as possible, finding as many books as possible. And I just literally dove in head first and just tried to learn as much as I could. And to be honest, I overwhelmed myself at the beginning because it was just, I would read about chemo, I would read about radiation, I would read about diets, I would read about stuff, and you your mind starts running around like, what was the root cause? Was it this? Was it this? Was it this? So it is very overwhelming, and that's why it's so important to talk to an individual like yourself to kind of calm the whole situation down and really set a plan. And I'm lucky enough for myself as an entrepreneur. I used my entrepreneurial skills to literally said, hey, I treated my body as a business plan. Like these are my goals, these are my short-term, this is my long-term goals. And this is what I need to get there. And through the whole process, especially the first 3 months, I was modifying, I'm changing stuff. As I learn, I'm changing. and you are going to change. Don't think whatever you set today is going to be, it could be different tomorrow, it could be different a week from now, because you're going to be learning and seeing how your body adapts and changes stuff. So if you do decide to go that chemo route, you might be making so many changes as your body reacts to the drug.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And quick question too, if somebody goes on chemo and they start reacting poorly to, like, do they have to finish the whole treatment, kind of like or even if they go halfway, could they pull away? Like, where's the mindset with that?
Well, there's even a new area. So yes, they could modify it, but the doctors don't want to do that, but they'll delay it. Could do the side effects instead of coming in every 2 weeks. Now you got to wait an extra week. One of my clients, he had to do that. He had to drive down to Houston. Oh, his blood count was so low, fast growing cells, red and white blood cells were so low, they couldn't do his treatment. So he had to drive back to Oklahoma City, 8 hours away, and then go back down the next week. And so, I have one client. So she actually, it's found that in Europe, they're actually doing a lower dose of immunotherapy treatment. So that's another thing we can talk about in the future. But and so they're actually starting to modify those doses. And there's low dose chemo and low dose immunotherapy. And so actually, she just on her own, she said, she just tells them, "I'm feeling sick. We need to stop this," and they stop the treatment. And then she goes, "Wink, wink," and the nurse goes, "Wink, wink. I understand," and just makes a note. Patient, is sick. Refuse treatment. And they stop that dose. So she's kind of estimating that based off of what they're doing in Europe. In the United States, has not approved that approach yet of this lower dose of her immunotherapy, and so she's a tiny person. She doesn't need the same amount as a 300-pound guy.
Yeah. So, which is crazy when you think about that. And coming from an individual like yourself that has a pharmaceutical background where dose is everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're putting these literally toxic poisons into your body. And they don't focus, and the same dose is for a 300-pound person to a 120-pound person, which is crazy when you think about that.
Exactly. Yes, they do try to modify some of those, but some of them are approved at a certain dose because that's what they did the studies, and they want to sell that and
sell it. I love that word. They
want to sell it. They want to sell that dose, and so everybody's making. It's a money deal. Everybody's making money. Everybody involved is making money, and so they're going to sell that dose. And if they don't sell that dose, it's more difficult for them to charge, that higher price. And then there's the waste that they claim. And that's a whole nother deal that would be another topic.
I'm going to use that as a soundbite for this podcast. This has been awesome, brother. Thank you for all the information. Until next week.
Pleasure. Okay.
Thank you, brother.
Uh-huh.